Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me here. It's my privilege and my honor. And I would like to thank especially Professor Violeta Lax, for having inspired this panel and bringing us all together, thinking about the point in the order of the day, which is precisely visas for asylum, not under EU law or not at all. First of all, I am a scholar myself. I am a professor of law and European law. I have an academic background, but I'm here as a policymaker. I am a member of the European Parliament for the last 7 years, having had a previous experience in national Spanish politics lawmaking as well. And I would like to share some thoughts for the coming 10 minutes on the matter from the European Parliament perspective, particularly from my perspective as rapporteur, because I happen to be the rapporteur of the Visa Code, which is underway in a protracted procedure. It's been underway for the last more than 2 years now, and within the realms of the competence of the so-called Libe Committee in the European Parliament. The Libe Committee is the committee in charge of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs, but it's the largest lawmaking committee in the House and the heaviest workload committee in the House, because it deals with fundamental rights, citizenship, free movement of persons. That means not only citizenship, but also asylum seekers and refugees, and the integrated management of the external borders of the European Union, and the constellation of agencies related to these fields of action, besides judicial cooperation in civil matters, police, and judicial cooperation in criminal matters and security strategy. But within this realm, we deal mainly with the legal development of the area of liberty, justice and security, Title 5 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union. I'm talking here about a most important component element of the whole Lisbon Treaty, which is in force. May I recall? Which is binding law for the European institutions, but for the member states as well. It's been in force ever since I was first elected to the European Parliament, 2009. It was finally in force December 2009, but precisely because of the expectation of the legal development of the area of liberty, justice and security, which was supposed to give way to a completely different chapter of the European history, precisely on the grounds that up until the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, justice and home affairs were no European jurisdiction, were no European competence, and the European Parliament was not involved as lawmaking body. But after the Lisbon Treaty, finally, it was no more intergovernmental cooperation, no more enhanced cooperation. It was ordinary legislative procedure and the subject matter for the European policy making and for the European lawmaking, which involves the European Parliament as a co-legislator with the Council. That's what I'm talking about. So the Visa Code has a legal basis completely different from the previous stage, which is the legal basis of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union itself. It's been clearly stated by Professor Violeta Lax. Article 67, Article 77 and 78, and I add Article 80. Article 80 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, which is the article which makes solidarity a legal mandate. Not only a wishful thinking, not only a, hopefully, if we may, subject for some arrangement or cooperation, but a legally binding principle of the whole idea of the area of liberty, justice and security. So the member states are bound by solidarity among themselves when managing the external borders of the European Union and when handling the issues of the human beings knocking on the doors of the external borders of the European Union, be them people seeking for work or for better opportunities, migrants, or be them people in despair, fleeing from turmoil or conflict, fleeing from the risk of losing their lives and the lives of their beloved ones, their families, asylum and refuge. Asylum seekers and refugees. That is a completely different stage regarding the previous one. We're talking here about legal mandates, not only legal basis, legal mandates. as it's been said, legally imperative for the member states. That's what I'm talking about. And in that regard, the point I want to make is that we've been having a background that has disappointed in many ways. For the past few years, it has disappointed in many ways the high expectations that were brought about when the Lisbon Treaty entered into force. Precisely because in time coincidence with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union, as you all know, submerged itself into its worst crisis ever. What was called the Great Recession, the big crisis, it's been said, a poly-crisis, a multi-factorial crisis in which financial, economic issues have damaged the European social model and have damaged, severely so, the willingness to integrate in a supranational union. And that was what it's all about. Precisely, that is the idea of the European Union. And as a consequence, many of the goals that were set forth in the Lisbon Treaty, particularly in the area of liberty, justice, and security, are yet to be seen, are yet to be finally accomplished. Among them, a number of files which are pending of the legislative procedure, which involves the European Parliament and the Council. But we in the European Parliament, we have made some points. And I myself have made a point about humanitarian visas included in the visa code. Humanitarian visas, making the best of the current dispensations of Article 19 and Article 25 of the current visa code, which means at least a chance on humanitarian grounds to provide the so-called limited territorial validity of some permission to entry of those who would have a legitimate claim once they are in the European soil to ask for humanitarian protection or subsidiary protection for that matter. The point being that this claim by the European Parliament, on which I, as a rapporteur, I built a majority in the European Parliament, I have built a majority in favoring this position, has been blocked trilogue after trilogue by the Council, which has consistently denied every chance for this legal avenue or legal pathway to finally take place. The idea, of course, is related to this security consideration. Some critics might argue security hysteria that has been brought about the perception that migrants and asylum seekers are a threat to European identity and, even worse, a threat to European security, because they pose a threat to our security. In that regard, the outlook towards migration issues, and thus, as a consequence, the outlook to asylum and refuge have been a negative outlook, preventive. The idea has been, how can we do better to prevent that from happening? How can we get there outside the external borders of the European Union? Not let them in, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Even if we have to deal with Turkey and spend 3 billion with impossible incentives that are completely out of reach, then let's make it so that they keep them out of our sight. That has been somehow the landscape in which this legislative procedure regarding the visa code has been dragging its feet and blocked by the Council for the last 2 years. But the purpose makes sense. It really makes sense. Let me remind you, it's about European fundamental right. I do believe that it's not only a legal right of asylum or legislation about asylum. There is a fundamental right to asylum. It's been enshrined by the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, a fundamental right to asylum, according to the humanitarian international law. And some constitutions, written constitutions of some member states in the European Union do also enshrine a right to asylum, including the Spanish one, Article 13, including the German one, Article 16. That's the case of the European Union itself. Article 18 enshrines a right to asylum. So it's about a fundamental right in the first place. Second, it is about protecting asylum seekers from ill treatment, of course, from refoulement. That is the idea. Non-refoulement. That is the principle of the idea. Yes. And the provision of collective expulsions, and all that legislation should also have to abide by the principles of good governance, transparency, and of course, providing for judicial remedies when a right is violated by some administration. Judicial remedies, there has to be some kind of a judicial standard to remedy that situation. But having said this, the point is that we had great expectations about a particular case that was brought about before the European Court of Justice. The Avocat General Mengozzi made its case, and I was very much excited about this legal reasoning because I subscribed to that legal reasoning line by the line. But, as you all know, the European Court of Justice mostly follows the reasoning of the Avocat General, not in this particular case, not for the first time, but not in this particular case. So finally, the legal ruling was disappointing. The legal ruling established that under the current dispensation of the European law, which means under the current visa code, there is no obligation for the member states to provide for humanitarian visas. They might, according to the national legislation, so they will, if they will, but there's no legal obligation to do so. I do not agree. I would have subscribed to the legal reasoning of Paolo Mengozzi, the Avocat General, and I would have argued this legal reasoning even within the jurisprudential standards of the European Court of Justice itself, because that there is no legal obligation does not mean that there is no legal ground, because there is. Article 25 of the current dispensation of the visa code is still there. It's there. So there is still some ground for a humanitarian visa to take place. But according to the misreading of this ruling, the member states have somehow hardened themselves. They have strengthened their resistance to give way to some sort of legal pathway. And of course, I do not need to explain that if there are not legal pathways for migrants or for that reason, for asylum seekers to ever make it to Europe, some of them, with the perception that they are risking their lives if they stay where they belong, where they were born, they would do whatever, even risking their lives and the lives of their families. And that's exactly what's happening. The death toll in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean turned to be a graveyard, a massive graveyard of thousands of casualties. Okay, I'm about to finish. Thousands of casualties, paying the price of their life, making it, giving it a try to make it. It only shows that if there are no legal pathways, they will come one way or the other. And it's extremely hypocritical to ignore and to condemn them, to ignore that fact and to condemn them, to make it illegally because they don't have not a single legal pathway from abroad to knock on some European embassy or consulate, for that matter, and ask for a humanitarian visa because they are not tourists. They don't want a visa to visit Florence for a maximum of 90 days. Of course, they need this they need this only shot they've got, and then apply legally from within, instead of coming here illegally and then resorting to the asylum claim. Finally, just a point, the country is blocking, the council is blocking, and I would like to, this is my final statement, I would like to really, how could I put it, to picture the council as the missing link in the decision-making process in the European Union so far, because I attend every invitation I've got from the university. I'm a professor myself, and I am very much used to hear, the European institutions are failing. They are all failing all the same. That's not the truth. The European Court of Justice mostly behaves. The European Parliament still has a pro-European majority. I don't know for how long, because Europhobia is on the rise, national populism is on the rise, extreme right nationalism is on the rise. I don't know what's going to happen in 2019, but there's still a pro-European majority in the European Parliament. I wonder, is there still a pro-European majority in the Council? Or are the member states failing to make the case for Europe in a European fashion and to abide by the principles they've subscribed to when they ratified the Lisbon Treaty? Or are they miserably failing to comply with the law they pledged to allege when they subscribed the Lisbon Treaty? That is my question. The Council is really misbehaving. It's now the missing link in the decision-making process. Thank you for your attention.